Welcome to Talaterra, where we help environmental educators build sustainable careers. That's why we're thrilled to have Louise Karch with us today. She is one of us, a former Outward Bound instructor with a master's in education. Louise has a deep appreciation for those who teach, protect, and advocate for our planet. For over a decade, Louise helped professionals across industries as a certified career management professional. She even worked with the Richard Bolles, author of What Color is Your Parachute?, the best-selling career and life planning book in history. Louise took that wisdom and turned it into action. She's the award-winning author of Word Glue and a key contributor to the global mega hit, The Carbon Almanac, It's Not Too Late. And her latest book, First Aid for Fairies, is an uplifting, steampunk-inspired guide helping teens turn stress into strength. It's even up for the Michael Princz Award from the American Library Association. Louise has mentored leaders in 71 countries and edutained audiences from Australia to the Arctic. Although, let's get real, after Canadian winters, Louise prefers warmth. And here's something special just for you. Louise is gifting listeners a comprehensive interview guide. It's packed with tools so you can toot your own horn without blowing it and land the roles you want. Today, we're diving into how environmental educators can identify and articulate their skills so that they can do more of what they love, secure meaningful opportunities, and build careers that matter. Let's join the conversation. Thank you, Louise, for being on the show today, for talking about your work as a career coach, a career mentor, and to talk about how environmental educators can identify and articulate their skills to explore cross-sector work. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, Tanya, I adore you and your work, so bring it on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So let's start here. How did you begin your work as a career coach?
I purchased a book, which I recommend everybody who's listening buy, called What Color is Your Parachute? By Richard Bolles. It is the best-selling career book of all time. And Dick, as he was called, Richard Bolles, was one of the fathers of modern career counseling. And I so adored his work. I used his book to actually figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I realized I wanted to be an Outward Bound instructor. So I did that for a while. And then every time I've made a career transition, I've come back to the book to look at what matters to me. And there's some really, really good exercises in that book that are classics. Because I liked him so much, I realized I wanted to be in the career management field a bit. And I went to go see him at the National Career Conference, NatCon, in Canada, in Ottawa, in the winter. And because of the kind of gal that I am, I sat in the front row right in front of him because I was so excited to meet him. And he did this presentation where he talked about skills and purpose using a flip chart of black paper, and he used neon chalk, and he would talk and then he would draw this beautiful diagram of what he was believing. And he had a black light over the chalkboard. And so these words would glow. Like, he was just so magical, both in the content of his wisdom and the creativity of his delivery. I was like, okay, I want to spend time with this man. I ended up working with and for him, one of the highlights of my life.
That's great. That sounds like a lot of fun. I have the new version of that book to read through and to work through myself. Because you've recommended it before. You've mentioned it before in our past conversations. And how long did you work with?
A couple of years. Because he stopped doing his residential workshops. He used to do a 2-week workshop in Bend, Oregon. No, it must have been I can't remember exactly how long it was, but you'd arrive early and then help out and then go. So maybe it just felt like 2 weeks. So but I just stayed in touch with him and just watched his beautiful work, and his influence never left me. So, he was one of the foundational people in my thinking and being.
Wow. You've done thousands of hours of mentoring in Australia. What gaps did you see in career training once you started to really immerse yourself in that field?
What I saw is how hard it is to do on your own. When you are in career transition, William Bridges talks about this in his book, Transitions. When you are ending one aspect of your life, but your new aspect hasn't begun, you're in this kind of limbo. And at the very time when you need to feel the most confident, you don't, because you're in this limbo. And it's really hard to see your strengths at that time. And if you're making a career transition where you're smart enough to do your career planning and you're like, okay, I'm getting ready to leave this job. Before I leave this job, I'm going to start looking for another job, so that you create a smaller bridge. Because when you want to go from employment to employment, not employment to unemployment to employment. So the gap that I saw was it's really hard to do skill identification on your own. Now, thanks to AI, you can actually write the story, and Richard talks about this technique. He recommends doing 7 stories from your career, and then you tell those stories to other people, and you have them help you identify what are the skills in the story. But now, thanks to AI and whether it's Chat or Claude, you can ask them those tools to help you identify the skills. But there is something really valuable when you're in community telling the stories and the people around you ask, well, can you tell me how you managed that project? Can you tell me what the result of your actions were? And how did you handle that person when they started not delivering on time? It's that dialogue that helps you see your skills in action. And if you tell enough of those stories, you'll see patterns, because generally the skills that we love to use are the ones that we get better at. But it's almost like you can't see the label on the bottle when you're in the bottle. So it really helps to have other people mirror back the skills that you're using. And most importantly is the so what of those skills. What's the benefit to the employer of the fact that you have those skills?
I can absolutely relate about being in transition there. That is so true. It's such an accurate description. And so how do you help people identify and articulate their value?
You've said a magic word, their value. And so let me go back and then go forward. One of the things that's really helpful, and there's a couple of free tools and some that are low cost, the values in action, character strength. So viacharacter.org can help you identify your values. Your top 5 values are what give you fulfillment. So have you ever done that exercise?
Yes, I have.
And do you remember?
I have done it.
What your top one was?
I don't remember. I've done the Clifton Strengths,
yep.
and I have the whole printout of that. But learner was number 1 in there, and I think something learnerish was I don't remember the exact characters.
Love of learning,
but I have to say it. Yeah, so it threw me for a loop, because I'm thinking, learner, what am I going to do with that?
Well, so this is exactly the dilemma. So for the listeners, sometimes you get those values and you're left with like, okay, so what? Well, we are solving in our world and in our organizations problems that we've never faced before. So if you're an environmental educator, then you're having to do different kinds of risk assessment, particularly in Australia, around fire, around, there's all sorts of different problems that you're solving. That takes agility, and agility can only be successful if you're curious and have a love of learning. So every employer wants to hire somebody who's willing to learn. So it's a benefit. And somebody who learns, has a process for learning, that means that they can get up to speed faster. And so what that means for the employer is you're saving them time. You're getting them better solutions faster. So that's the kind of what I call the benefit link. People buy aspirin not because it contains ASA or but because it reduces their pain or their headache. And so you're trying to figure out, I have this skill, I have a love of creativity and a love of learning, and this means I'm going to bring you unique solutions that can be implemented more quickly because I have done the deep learning to make sure this solution is viable.
That makes perfect sense.
Well, I'm going to pause there and just add one more thing, and that is it's really helpful for people to create a binder that they call their career portfolio or their career binder. So make it a hard copy because, computers do weird things. And even though I'm assuming that people do backups regularly and they've got their cloud accounts, all the rest of it, it's helpful to have an actual binder. And in there, you'll keep your assessment tools. If you've got performance reviews, you can keep it in there. If you get thank you letters, keep it in there. Just have a place where all that stuff lives so that if you suddenly find yourself in transition, you go, right, I need that career binder again. Yes. So I just wanted to add that for those tools, keep them in one place, both electronically and a binder.
Great advice. It's a great transition to my next question. You wrote an interview database. It's a guide in one sense, and then again, it's not. And it really is a database. It's a database about you.
Yeah.
And when people work through the database, you teach them how to brag.
Yes.
and so can you talk about, well, first I need to share that while reading this interview database, for me, tension set in immediately. I was looking at the questions and I wasn't sure how to answer some of them. And there were actions there that I couldn't see myself doing. But what I appreciate about this guide is that you make the user confront sticky questions like strengths and weaknesses about, why did you leave? Why should I hire you? And then you teach people how to brag and navigate questions about money. So can you talk about how you approach bragging?
I read this fabulous book called Brag, How to Toot Your Own Horn Without Blowing It. It's a fabulous book. And so I thought I'm going to use the brag as a model. And so brag stands for, what's the big picture of what's sort of like going on? And then you review the context of what you're doing. And the A is the action. So what actions did you take in this situation, this project, this problem? And then G is gain. What was the gain? And it's sometimes really hard for people to see what gain their projects had. So I'm trying to give you an example here. So a gain can be something that you achieve. So, you save time or, I'm going to talk about the Fairy Godmother project. So this is a project I did with Diane Vale. And in the olden days where people have money in their purses, we would gather up small bills, coins, and we would then divvy it out into groups of amounts of $100 if people could volunteer to be a fairy godmother and take that $100 as seed money to launch their project and say to other people, I'm a fairy godmother and will you help me fund this project? Well, the gain there is that we empowered groups of women to choose to be leaders and to go out to community with their idea and to get funding. So all of a sudden, we're scaling hope, we're scaling possibility, we're turning women who haven't engaged in community leadership into community leaders. What's the outcome? Well, for us, it was hope at scale. And this shows, if I was talking to an employer, this shows I can come up with a really creative way to engage people. And if you're hiring me to take on projects, I will bring that same creativity and innovation and scale to your project and to your enterprise. That's going to make your brand stand out. So that's the benefit link, right? So I went from the story to the link. Okay, I'll pause so you can get a question in.
That's great. That's good. It's brilliant because you help people identify their stories and just take it that one step further. And so yeah, the example that you just shared, and then the ones that are in your guide really illustrate the point. It really makes good sense.
Well, we're taught to be humble. And isn't that a wonderful thing? And all of a sudden, if somebody's got a preference for introversion, they have to go into an interview and they have to pretend they're an extrovert. They have to talk about themselves. Like, the level of discomfort is so high. I created the guide using kind of a way, a document to hold your values, your interests, your skills, so that people could see themselves in a positive light at a time in their life where they didn't have the same amount of confidence.
Exactly. This brings me to my next question. So we're kind of already there. So often interviews are perceived as happening to you. and and in your interview database, you encourage people to ask questions and to talk a lot and to split the time talking 50-50 with the interviewer. Can you unpack this idea?
Well, and it's very hard to do. So this is from Dick Bolles' teaching, and I have to see if it's still valid. It was for a time. If you got the interviewer talking more, the more they talk, the more they were likely to hire you, which is a whole exploration on ego and selfhood right there. But anyway, what that does mean is that the questions you ask at the end, when they ask you questions, need to be well thought out ahead of time. The best way to have a peak performance in your interview is to practice a lot ahead of time. And so rehearsing with your friends, rehearsing with an AI tool, that's going to help you be more present. And when they go, do you have questions for us? You can say, yes, I want to understand more about this part of your mission. And what does it mean for this role? I want to know, please, in 30 days, how will you know you've hired the right person? What's the first project I will be assigned on? And what outcomes are you expecting? And then when you ask this question, you can again link back to your skills. Oh, so you're really wanting to enhance your brand's reputation, or you're really wanting to grow your movement, or you're really wanting to increase advocacy for this national park. I can help you with that because I had a project that was similar when I did this. And so I bring those skills, project management, financial, I'm riffing here, keeping projects on budget, to this one as well. So it's still telling that story, asking your question, seeing what they say, and then if you can, link it back to something that's going to give them the confidence to say yes. Your interviewer or panel, if you've got a panel, they've got some sort of checklist and they've got some sort of marking criteria in round one where they're giving you points or checks to see whether they meet your particular skills. So the more you can do to align your answers with what they need, the better. What that means is take that job description and put it into an AI tool and get it to tease out what are the skills that they're looking for. When you list those skills, those are the skills that you need to prepare stories for. And if you ask AI, figure out what are the top 5 skills that this job needs, then you need to have 3 stories for each of the top 5 skills.
So 3 stories for the top 5 skills. Yeah, that's a lot of prep work, but that's a really, it's a really enticing challenge as well. And all this, you make the point in your guide that interviews are not about you. They are about linking what you have to offer so you can, serve the person in front of you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you just illustrated that beautifully. You just explained that beautifully. And, so what if you find yourself in a situation where you can't come up with that many stories? That's the first thing that came to my mind. And then also practicing. How have you encouraged people to practice their stories?
I think it's helpful for people to know it can take 30 hours to create your database. That's a week, right? That's a week or a couple of weeks of getting ready. And once you've done that fundamental work, you've got it in your career binder and it's there. And the next time you have to go for an interview, you've got, the past stories. I will say that if you're in a job now, and the head of Levi's used to do this, he had a little notebook on his desk, like, got Levi's into the Chinese market. Like, that's a major accomplishment. If you can keep a little notebook where, every Friday you go, okay, what did I accomplish this week? So that there's some place where you're continually tracking your stories. And depending on how corporate an environment you're in, they're going to have KPIs or key performance indicators that they need you to be measuring it. So there's going to be some forced, accountability of your results. If you aren't in an organization like that, you need to be tracking your own stories in some way, notebook, phone, so that you have a database, a living database all the time. So when it comes to, oh my gosh, I need 15 stories, you don't panic. You've been tracking your stories as you go. I think I wandered away from your core question though, Tanya. So just ask me again.
No, you didn't. It was a question about how to practice those stories and keeping track of them on a weekly basis. That's definitely a good way to keep track of the individual stories, but then also, to use that as a foundation for practice. That's a really good suggestion. That's something that doesn't happen. I wonder how many people
I think that. Very few people do that. If you've got an annual performance review process, then you have to look at your work on an annual basis. And again, print that out, stick that in the career binder so you got it. And it's not so hard when you're going to an interview to go find a story. So we are our own worst critic. And that's also why it's important to stop every once in a while and kindly, sweetly, lovingly look at the goodness that you bring to the world. Because, most of the time we feel like we're not enough or we don't do enough. And so having some sort of process where you stop and actually honor that when all the chaos was happening around you during a particular incident, you're the one who were calm. You were the one who asked people to stop and to use a physiological sigh, breathe in for 4, out for 8. And you're the one who cracked a joke and brought people back. I mean, each one of us has a particular talent and skill for the way we work and how we work with others. And sometimes, as I said earlier, we can't see that. So in terms of practicing, if you've got a friend at work, which is a gift, because if you've got a friend at work, you're more likely to stay in that organization. You can ask them, what do you see about my self-management skills, how I manage myself? What do you see about my functional skills, the skills I use to actually do the job? What do you think are my transferable skills, the skills I can take to another workplace? I guess the overall thing is try not to do this by yourself because you're just going to avoid it. You're going to avoid it because who wants to talk about themselves? Who wants to get ready for an interview? Just about no one.
Yes, true. So true. And then transitioning into a new sector makes it that much more intimidating and just creates that much more anxiety.
Let's talk about that because what Richard Bolles talked about so beautifully was the difference between a role and a field. So if you're in environmental education and your role is a guide and actually, you give me an example, Tanya. What would be a role in a field?
It could be curriculum development. It could be leading camps. It could be writing interpretive copy for interpretive panels. It could be leading nonprofits. It could be teaching. It could be, exploratory activities, STEM activities, research. It could be a lot of different roles.
So each one of those roles is in a field. And right now, those roles are all in the environmental education field. And you could stay in the environmental education field and change your role. So if you've been doing copywriting, if you've been doing, creating guided walks in national parks, well, you've got the ability to research. You've got the ability to align visuals with text for maximizing learning. So you know about accelerating learning principles, you know about engagement, you know about probably semiotics. So where else are those skills needed? Well, museums. You might be heading to museums. So each one of those skill sets can help you shift to different roles, but you do have to back up and go, what are the skills that I love to use most? And who needs me to solve the kind of problems I love to solve? What field is that? So field, think of that as a circle and a line through a circle. So the middle, underneath the line is field, and above the line is role. And you can either change your role or your field. The hardest transition is to change both your role and your field at the same time. So sometimes people will do hop skip. So they'll stay in environmental education, but change their role. And then they'll stay in that role, but change their field. They'll move into might move into public health education, or they might move into government policy development. So I'm hoping that's helpful. It's hard to do visuals when you're in an auditory context.
Those are very helpful examples, and it does translate just fine, just beautifully. Yeah, because the focus of the new newsletter, which is called Transferable Solutions, is the theme for the newsletter is environmental skills reimagined.
Oh, beautiful.
And it serves two purposes. One is to help the people who work independently in the field to develop new relationships with people in other sectors. And the second purpose is to serve as a guide for people who decided that they need to leave the field. Well, if they feel they've exhausted all their options and feel they need to move beyond seasonal work or part-time work, but they still want to do environmental work in some capacity, to help them find environmentally minded work in another sector, in some other field. And so this conversation is very helpful, and your guide is just wonderful. I think it's very, very helpful. And like I said, those questions really stopped me in my tracks and really had to think about.
Well, and what I'd like to do, Tanya, is to have another conversation with you, and we'll adapt that guide for people in environmental education. So we'll have a skills list that speaks to that sector, and that we'll customize it. But I also want to say this. So when I was an Outward Bound instructor, I mean, that is intense work, right? You're planning the trip, you're packing the trip, you're taking a group of strangers into the bush so that they can lead themselves at the end, right? I mean, it's intense. We're rock climbing, whitewater paddling, we're portaging, they're doing a solo. All the things that are going on there, safety, interpersonal relationships, personal challenge. I mean, there's thousands of skills that are used before the students even arrive. So for people who are environmental educators feeling like, I don't know what to do, it's really helpful to realize that some sectors have a wide pyramid and some people have a narrow pyramid. And what I mean by that is the wider the pyramid, the more roles there are at different levels going up. But environmental education, it's a very narrow pyramid. So what I mean by that is there's a bunch of practitioners, and then there's a couple people running the organization, and there's an executive director and maybe a board. It's narrow. So the chances of moving up into a full-time role are very, very small. So if you want to move up, that means you need to get, management experience, finance experience, and that might be volunteering on a board. So if you want to move up and become a director of those organizations, then you need to look at what are the skills of an executive director, or what are the skills of a project manager, and then you go and get those skills with projects or community service or serving other boards. If you want to stay involved, but you don't want to run a particular organization, I see my other sort of Outward Bound colleagues, some went into teaching, some were teachers, and they, worked with Outward Bound as they were getting over the summers, and they would teach in the schools. But, some of them have done well financially, some have not. And the ones who haven't done as well couldn't figure out what sector where they could be of most service and make a living and a life. So, I think what you're doing is so important, because employment gives us a sense of self, but it also gives us the income so that we can protect ourselves, particularly women, because there's a lot of women in the outdoor education field because of their values. I know there's a lot of men too, in terms of the more adrenaline-based work. But we do have to figure out how to love the planet and ourselves in equal measure.
Yeah, that is one of the big things that I'm exploring through this newsletter and through conversations like this, on the podcast. And you are so right. You explained I've had similar observations within the field. And also, you mentioned being introverted earlier. I've, noticed that sometimes people enter natural resource field or environmental education, maybe the interpretive field, because they like doing research or doing something away from people, but then sometimes they find themselves dropped into a role of being frontline interpreter. And sometimes there's tension there. Yeah.
Well, look, let's think about any job has three elements. And there's the data, there's people, and things. So you want to make sure that your job has those three things in the right order. So my wife is a researcher, but she's a pracademic. She likes turning theory into action. She's not so keen on people en masse. So she's fine in small groups. I took her to the Christmas caroling. The poor thing is like surrounded by 1,000 people. She's like, I'm finding there's a lot of people here. That's hard for her because poor people with a preference for introversion get drained by a lot of people. So let's go back to the three: data, people, and things. So my friend's grandson is becoming a carpenter because things are his number one, then data, then people. So he doesn't have very much interaction with the general public because he works on a crew and he gets to build things, which he loves. So data, people, things. If people is your number one, then things, well, then maybe you're building ropes courses. So you have to look at those three things and go, what's the order that's going to fuel me as opposed to drain me? Data, people, things. That's just a very basic sorting.
That's not basic to me. That's very helpful. That's very helpful. I need to think about my own activities, data, people, and things. That is very helpful. Thanks, Louise. That is very helpful. I bet you've got a whole bunch of people thinking now.
Yeah. Because if you're an environmentalist and data is your number one, well, that knocks out a whole bunch of careers you don't even think about, and that opens up other ones.
Yeah, so true. Absolutely. Do you teach workshops, and how long did you workshops?
Well, this is something I did when I was in Canada, and I did it for 10 years. And in Australia, I shifted. What happened is I realized that career planning, the process of marketing yourself, was branding. And so then I left personal branding and I wanted into real branding, which is why I looked at naming and taglines and sort of just because of my love of words. But recently I ran a job finding club here locally. And one of the tools I used, which I'll mention, was a Jackson Vocational Interest Survey. That is really helpful. You need a qualified person to interpret it because it's very easy to interpret it incorrectly. That your scores, your interest scores, can really help you figure out what field and what role would be a good fit for you, would give you energy as opposed to drain you. So yeah, I've gone back to it partly because I'm now looking for work. I have been a freelancer most of my time in Australia, but I'm wanting to end the last part of my career. I don't think I'm ever going to stop teaching in one level, but I want to be with a cool team, doing neat stuff because I'm a little too solo here. I want a cadre of people who are hopefully sane. And doing cool projects.
Okay. So how can people learn to rehearse their interviews?
All right. Well, you're not going to want to do this, but if you do it, you're going to stand out. I'm a former figure skater. So train. And then you would have a dry run. And a dry run would be you put your costume on, you'd have a mock panel of judges. They would call you out for a 6-minute warm up. They would clear the ice. You do your program. So you have to rehearse in as much similarity to the actual event as the actual event. What this means for you is you will dress up in whatever your ensemble is, and you will get together with some friends. And you can, in the interview database, there's a page that you can print out. I call it you need a pair of dice. I can't remember what I call the page, but anyway, the questions are in chunks of 12. And so you just get your friends to roll the dice if they want. And they ask you question number 6, or they ask you question number 11. Or they can actually, if your friends are really into it, pull a group of people together. Anybody need to practice interview skills, and get together and practice. So you would set it for an hour. You would figure out what questions you're going to ask. You sit at a table. You have your resume there. Just practice as close to the similarity as you can. Now, some people are being interviewed by AI. So they'll be sent a link. AI will be asking them questions, and their answers will be recorded. So, find out what the format is so that you can practice in that format. But practice, and it's also going to be fun, right? So you're going to roll the dice to warm up and have your friends ask you questions, and then have as close to possible mock interview. And if you're brave enough, and you're going to hate this too, but you should do it, record it. Record the presentation, your interview. We record the skating routines because I thought I was skating really fast, and it turns out I was not skating fast, and I thought my arm was up, and it looks like, I looked like, I don't know, whatever I thought I looked like, I didn't look like. So yeah, practice, record, review. Interviewing is not a valid way to hire somebody. So you have just as much luck flipping a coin and hiring somebody. So it's a game. Figure out how you're going to play it, and figure out and choose to enjoy it, so that you go in there knowing that you're more ready than anybody else. And here's why. And there's some questions that you need to actually memorize, which I know is annoying, but the tell me about yourself, you got to memorize that. Do you have questions for us? Memorize that. Why do you think we should hire you? Memorize that. And the reason why you're memorizing it is not so you sound canned. It's because if you memorize it, you're going to internalize it. And once it's internalized, you've got it. And then you can be completely present to the person in front of you. And I call that personalize. So memorize, internalize, personalize, and then you can handle whatever comes at you.
So if interviewing is not the best way to recruit people, what might be an alternative?
Well, look, here's where we get totally creative. You ideally don't want to have to be in an interview position. So what does that mean? Well, if you join your association, and if you volunteer for an organization that you love in some capacity, or do a project with them, if you develop those relationships, you're going to be the person who hears about a job. Or maybe you're the one who's going to go, hey, I can see this organization needs this. I'm going to apply for a grant to do that for that organization, which gets me in the door. They don't have to pay for me. I'm going to do some good work. And, I know that's soft money grants, but maybe that will get you in the door to do something else. Dentists will have somebody be chairside, right? They will actually bring somebody in and see how a dentist works with somebody. So there might be organizations that actually bring you in to see how you work. Some organizations bring groups of people in and have them solve problems together. Oh, that's horrible. Again, find out what the process is. For you to stand out, do different things. So let's say you want to get into urban rewilding, and you want to help green spaces, those little green strips in cities, become habitats for biodiversity. Well, if you create a paper, let's call it a green paper, not a white paper, on the principles and practices, the best global principles and practices of rewilding urban spaces, and you go to your city municipality and say, I've created this paper for you, and I'm really interested in doing this. Who should I talk to? Well, you're coming with value, and you're coming with thoughtfulness, and you're not coming begging for a job. You're coming saying, here's a resource for you. Who should I talk to? And that generosity might open a door, an unexpected door.
Yep, that's a nice idea. Plus, it's a way to show your work, and it's a way, like you said, to be very, very generous.
Yeah, it's a green paper, so figure out if there's a green paper that you can do.
In your experience, have you observed any way of showing one's work that is more effective in terms of website or portfolio or, some type of static place to go?
I think it's a great idea to have a website, says the woman whose website got taken and I have to reclaim it. But anyway, yes, a website is a good idea. In the olden days, when dinosaurs walked the earth, you could bring your portfolio in. I mean, designers will have a portfolio. It'll be online now, but in the olden days, when Tyrannosaurus was fighting whoever Tyrannosaurus was fighting, you would present your folio. So yes, I think it's a really good idea. Some people will use LinkedIn to kind of highlight their stories and their accomplishments. Some people will have their own website. Thanks now to Wix and Square, it's not too hard to create your own site, says the woman who hasn't done hers right now. Although WordGlue is live, wordglue.co. So the thing is that the way you do your site is about you, but you want to make sure that you go a little deeper and show what this means for others. So you have to have a benefit link. So if you're highlighting a project you did, you don't say an example of me using my leadership skills. You say community building, engaging diverse audiences. So you just think of how you can title things so that they're outcome based.
That's a good point. Very good point. You include in your database a wealth of resources. What might you add to this section?
Well, AI. I think AI is the game changer, and it's a real opportunity for you to to make writing your green paper easier. Although right now at the stage we're at, ChatGPT, for example, has a tendency to make things up. So you need to be very careful if you're using that as a tool, that it's actually valid if you're pretending to research something. So just, please go to primary sources if you're putting together something thoughtful. So AI is useful. And what I didn't talk about in that book then, because I was working in a career agency, a career management agency, and we brought people together. We did workshops twice a week, and so people were practicing together. We had an interview room where we used a video camera to video. I mean, now you can do it on your phone, but then we had a video camera where we recorded people. So what I would say, if people don't have access to a community-based career management support service, is create your own. It's not so much the books that I would add. I would add the continuum of AI to help you, and then community to help each other. Because it's great if you can afford to hire a career counselor, but not everybody can, depending on what's happening in their families or their personal lives. So thanks to whatever platform you're on LinkedIn, you can say, hey, I'm in the San Francisco area. I'm in Botswana. I'm in, I'm in Bolivia. I'm in Toronto.
Yeah.
I'm in Paris. Who wants to get together to meet once a week for 6 weeks to help each other find a job?
That's perfect. Absolutely. Create a community to practice. And those communities it can be a co-working community. It can be people you meet at conferences. It can be your book club. It could be all sorts of people.
And it can be online. So if you have an association, if you're part of the Association of Experiential Educators, or you talked about the American Booksellers, or the floral illustrators of what you can go, hey, how many of you are in career transition? And you can ask your association to sponsor it too. So I highly recommend being involved in either the association for the field that you are in and love, or get into the association of the field that you want to be in. You asked me about the best portfolios or the best way of presenting skills. I once had this woman who worked at a university, and she was using, I This woman was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And she got kicked out by a political squabble. Nothing to do with her performance. This woman was brilliant. And such a talented project manager. Oh my gosh. So when I told her to put together a career portfolio, she came in with the best career portfolio I had ever seen. She had tabs, and some people are label people, right? They've got their own label maker at home. So she had made these gorgeous label makers, and the tabs were color coded. And then the pages within the colored tabs were, had, colored paper behind the plastic sheets that hold the pages. And then she carefully, what are those crafting people called? She laid out the pages beautifully.
Yeah, the scrapbook people.
People. So she brought this thing in, and it was probably like one of those like 2.5, like 3-inch spines, 5 centimeters. So it was massive. And so when she came to her interview, she got this first job she applied for. So boom, she lays down this, and they go, can you give us an example of when you manage a project? I certainly can. And she go, flip, 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 flip. Here's a picture from, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and can you tell me about your community service? Okay, here's where we built schools in Madagascar. I mean, the woman was just like, oh,
wow, that's wonderful.
She still is. Mm-hmm. But, she, depending on your family background, depending on, your life trajectory, you're going to have more confidence in your bank account, and more you'll have had access to more opportunities. So if you've had less opportunities and less access, and if your family's had more trauma, if you'd have more trauma, it's going to take more work to get those stories. And the only way you can have that sense of self is by, well, I don't know if it's the only way, but one of the ways is coming into community and sharing your stories and having other people validate your skills, whether it's a career coach, whether it's a group of people. I absolutely believe everybody has gifts and talents to share. And it's just sometimes we need to just like change the wattage of the light bulb we're using to look for those stories.
And something I would add to that is to try to have include in that conversation people from outside of your field. Mm-hmm. I have learned so much from my experience with the Akimbo workshops, with the Carbon Almanac, with Purple Space, I so appreciate hearing hearing what they see in my project, in other things that I've done. Because when you talk to people and I've been telling people since the early Akimbo days, you got to talk to people outside of the field, because they don't make the same assumptions that you do. They see things that you just do not see. And their questions are honest, they're generous, they're inquisitive, and they ask such good clarifying questions that, you need that. You need to put yourself out there.
Well, just hanging out with different people. Tanya, I'll never forget when you and I were wandering around the Getty Museum, right? And I was just being myself and talking to strangers, which I do all the time. And you later acknowledged on some post somewhere that talking to strangers is my superpower. And I was like, I didn't even realize that, right? Because the fish can't see the water. So that's why we need other people reminding us of the gifts that we bring, because we can't see them ourselves sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Louise. This has been fantastic. You always have such beautiful examples to share and such wisdom, and I so appreciate you making time for this conversation.
Of course.
To learn more about Louise, her books, the resources we talked about, and to download your copy of her interview database, visit the show notes for this episode. And if you'd like to meet with other environmental educators to move your career forward, subscribe to my newsletter. It's where you will learn about upcoming opportunities. Thank you for joining us today. See you next time.